from Rochdale, from 31 Toad Lane. It was the former store of the Rochdale Pioneers Society, and I'm sure some of you will have heard that before. Most of you are pioneers in your own organisation. So forgive me if I tell you anything you already know, but for those who don't, I'm going to give you a bit of a whistle-stop tour as to why this building's here, what it's got to do with the cooperative movement, and what it's got to do with the woodcraft folk now, what the connections are. So to do that, I'm going to share my screen in a little while, but I do want to show you some footage before I do that from a long time ago, and it was people like you enjoying a summer camp, which I know that you were supposed to have been doing at the moment as part of Co-op's Fortnight, and unfortunately you can't do that, but we're hoping that next year will be the dream year, right? Okay, so I'm going to share my screen, I'm going to show you a little bit of footage, and then I'm going to get into what we do here. So bear with me one moment. Right, I'm going to talk you through, I'm not going to show you the whole film, but I'm going to talk you through, this is a piece of footage of the woodcraft folk at the Brighton Children's International Camp in 1937. And this footage was taken, most of it is about, you know, British woodcraft folk groups coming together, but there were also similar sorts of organisations from different parts of Europe and some places that were a little bit further away. And this was just before the Second World War kicked off, so Europe was having a pretty bad time. There was a lot of deprivation, there was a lot of difficulties and political struggles. So things like this, these sorts of gatherings and meetings were really, really important for people to get together and try to find peaceful ways to interact with each other. I'm sure you've noticed that in this footage, the children have all got their, you know, woodcraft folk uniforms on, the leaders have got theirs on, they've got cricket bats, they've got, you know, kind of equipment, so they're all off to have a camp. But I mean, that's supposed to be a bit different these days. You guys will probably have sleeping bags and all sorts of special kit if you were going to go on an outdoor camp. These people have literally got a woolen blanket, some jam sandwiches, maybe a raincoat if they're lucky, but it was pretty basic. It was pretty, you know, rough and ready. But I really like, I'm going to skip forward in the footage a little bit, because I really like some of the games that these guys were playing. I mean, I think some of them look quite dangerous personally. But if we skip forward a little bit to this is a shot of them on the beach at Brighton, out on what was obviously a really hot sunny day. And let's bear in mind that all of the swimming costumes are also made out of wool at this stage. So it's not just wool, scratchy blankets that you sleep in.
Liz, it might just be me, but we can't see the video playing.
Oh dear. Oh, that's a shame. Don't know why that would be the case. I'll tell you what we'll do then. We will go back to the main screen, and I'll try and send you the video footage.
That would be good.
Because I think if you can't see it, that's no good, is it? So hopefully, if I share my screen for the presentation slides, you will be able to see those. But as you can see, I am in the original shop, 31 Toad Lane. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what was happening here in the Victorian period. But I want to introduce us as the Heritage Trust and explain what it is that we do now. I'm going to share my screen with you. Just let me know if you can see this. Can you see the picture?
Yeah, we can see it.
Brilliant. Oh, that's a good start. Okay, so we are the Co-operative Heritage Trust, and we want to welcome you guys, the woodcraft folk, to our building, if not in real life. And actually, for some of you, it would be pretty difficult for you to get to Rochdale on a normal day if we didn't have this pandemic happening. So this is a fairly unusual opportunity for you to come together from parts of the country. And you can see in this picture, this is what the museum looks like now. Used to be a shop. Before it was a shop, it was a wool warehouse. And back in the 1840s, when society took over this shop, it didn't have the big glass tower stuck onto the side. That's something we've put on it, because this building is really, really small. So we needed to make it slightly bigger, partly so that we could put proper modern toilets in, which it didn't have before. So if you do ever come in real life in person, you will be able to go to a proper toilet. So we look after the museum in Rochdale, and we also look after an archive in Manchester, which has lots of records, photographs, documents about all sorts of different parts of the cooperative movement and the history of it. So we're going to talk a little bit about co-ops, and I'm sure you know what they are, but just for those who don't, they are more than a shop. That's what people tend to think of when you say co-op. People think of shops in high streets. They don't necessarily think of co-ops being what they really are, which is member-controlled organisations. So that's places and groups, societies, clubs, where people get to vote, where they get a say in how things are done, and where they get to learn and participate together in a democratic way. So these are our modern principles. These are the principles all co-ops now use, but they're based on what happened here in Rochdale in 1844. So we're going to look at what a co-op is, Rochdale's cooperative past, how it all started, and I'm going to ask you guys how co-op-y you are. So I've got a really, really short quiz at the end of the presentation, and I want to see if you guys get the answers right. So I'm going to ask you to unmute the mics in a little while. So, what's it like to be cooperative? How can you tell something is a co-op or is a cooperative organisation? What does it really mean? What makes it different? It's a different way of doing things, a way that sort of makes that organisation stand out because it does things for different reasons, with different sets of values to other groups or organisations. We're going to go back in time now. This is my clock that's been unpicked. I don't have a time machine, of course, so this is a virtual version of a time machine. So we're going to have to go back to Rochdale in 1844. And this is when, of course, the society first opened its doors, but it wasn't the first cooperative society in the history of co-ops. It was just the most successful one. So actually, there were lots and lots of co-ops in different places. Some didn't call themselves a co-op. Some just thought of themselves as a group of people supporting each other. So like in rural areas, particularly where lots of people relied on farming before the Industrial Revolution, lots of groups of farmers would sometimes come together and work together as a village. And that was really important because if a harvest was to fail, if people didn't come together and didn't pool their crops and their resources, some people might starve. So the idea of being cooperative had always been fairly popular, but not everywhere understood what the word cooperative actually meant. But years before Rochdale opened its doors, there were other versions of the same thing that called themselves co-ops. Now, why wasn't, say, Burnley or Brighton or London famous for starting the co-op movement? Why was it Rochdale? Well, the reason is that lots of those little co-ops, they didn't survive, they didn't succeed, and they didn't last. There were so many reasons why they didn't. But instead of talking about the ones that weren't successful, we're going to talk about the one that was. So has anybody seen this picture before?
Yeah.
Yeah, some people are familiar with it. Okay, but can anybody, since we've got quite a small group, can anybody point out some of the things that are obvious about this picture straight away? What does this picture tell you about the people in the photo?
They're all men.
They're all men. Anything else about them? So they're all men. I mean, I personally think they all look pretty old as well. None of them look that young. So there's no women, there's no young people. That's not strictly true, of course, because there are 13 people in the picture, but there were 28 original pioneers. And the two chaps stood up at the back, they were the youngest members. And when they started with the society, they were 18, so they were teenagers. They don't look like that there, but they were only, this is only the men in their 30s at this point. But quite a few of the pioneers were young, quite young at the time. By the time this picture is taken, it's 20 odd years later, and quite a lot of them have died or moved away. So they're not all in the picture. Is there anything else for those who are watching? Again, we'll mute your mics if you want to sort of comment. Is there anything else about the way they're dressed that would tell you a bit about the way they live their lives, what sort of people they are?
They're all wearing suits. A lot of them are wearing pocket watches, so it's like...
They're wearing suits, yeah. Now, have you noticed that some of the suits don't fit very well? Some of the waistcoats are a bit tight, some of the jackets maybe too big, too small.
Yeah, not exactly like gone to a high street shop and had them tailored, I guess.
No, and in fact, actually, we think that some of the people in the picture, that they weren't wearing their own clothes. We think that they borrowed some of those pieces of clothing, especially things like the neckties and the pocket watches, because they were very expensive, even in the 1860s when the photo was taken. So actually, lots of working class people who had their first photos taken borrowed the clothes from the studio because their own clothes were dirty, had holes in them, you know, they wore them to work every day, maybe only had one change of clothes. And sometimes when people were really hard up, they used to pawn their best clothes, their Sunday best, to get some extra money at the end of the week. So sometimes they didn't actually have that suit of clothes to wear. So we think some of them are in borrowed kit, quite frankly. And what else gives it away is that these are working class men. They're not all really poor. Some of them are poorer than others. But if you notice on the floor, there's a carpet on the floor of the photographer's studio. And on top of the carpet are some thick sort of pieces of cardboard. And they show up in the picture. And it's because the photographer put those pieces of cardboard down on the floor to stop the dirty feet full of mud from ruining the studio. So they're definitely there to protect the studio from poor people. So that's how we know that they weren't well off. And the other clue is that at the back of the picture, it looks a little bit like they're in maybe a town hall or a temple or something like that, a posh building. Does anybody know what it actually is?
A backdrop?
It is a backdrop. Well done, that's Freya. It's a painted curtain. So somebody's stretched a curtain and painted a pretty scene on it. It's not real. It's just in an old warehouse. So this photography studio is just in an old industrial building. So it's not real. And in fact, the desk that they're sat at, that they've got their book on, that's their copy of the rules of how to be a co-operator, that desk is made out of papier-mâché, not real. So lots of things from the picture are not what they seem. So, but what we do know, of course, is they are all men. They are all white. And they are fairly old. So some of them are better off than others. There are a couple of people who are relatively well off, but there are a few who, unfortunately, they die in poverty, that they're so poor that they don't leave anything behind and they have to have a pauper's grave. So it's not all plain sailing for all of these guys. But that's not what they set out to do. They didn't set out to be personally rich and well off. They set out to do something that would support their community. And that's because everybody in Rochdale, whether they worked in the textile mills or whether they worked in other types of jobs or businesses, were experiencing similar things in the 1840s. It was a really difficult time. There was lots of reasons why it was hard, but there was lots of unemployment at that point. The population was absolutely massive in Rochdale. It was 15 times what it had been 50 years before. So it was overcrowded. The houses were dirty, they stank, there was no running water, there was lots of disease as well. And for children like this, living and working in Rochdale, most children in the 1840s would start work at about the age of 7, and they'd do pretty much full-time work, 6 days a week. And only much later, after the law had been changed, was it compulsory to go to school. So the children in the picture, this photo, this is a much later picture, this is from 1910, and these children are all aged under 14. So all of them are kind of, I guess, your guys' age. And that's because when you got to 14, you got more expensive as an employee. So businesses had to pay more money to have older workers. So what do you think was the case when there was unemployment? If they say mum and dad didn't have a job, do you think the children in the family would be working or not? What do you reckon?
I think they would.
Yeah, thumbs up for you if you think the children would have a job. Yeah, you're pretty much right. It was children were almost totally employed. And the person who'd be the least likely to have a job would be the father of the family. Any guesses as to why? Go on, Kate and Gregory.
They're expensive.
Absolutely, they're expensive. It's very much more expensive to hire a man at the time than a woman or a child. So most women earned about 1/3 of a man's wage for doing the same job. So it's pretty unfair, and children earn half that. So it's really bad. And they have to work really long hours as well, sometimes 12 hours a day. And that's, you think about how long you'd normally be in school for if you're in school. It's double that really, isn't it? Almost double. So it's a pretty hard life, and it's dangerous too. And on top of that, these are the types of houses you might be living in. What do you reckon to that? Would it surprise you to know that this street, Elderbury Place, it's only 5 minutes away from here? I mean, it doesn't look like this anymore, thankfully. This is a posh street. This is actually one of the poshest streets in Rochdale at the end of the 19th century because it's got paved streets in between the houses. And it's actually got, if you look at the picture, it's got 2 gutters to take away rainwater and, sort of dirty water. Most streets didn't have that. Most streets didn't have paving, and your house would have a dirt floor, not a wooden floor or a concrete floor. Those came much later. Just have a look at the house on the corner, the house nearest to you in the picture. How many families, do you think might live in that house?
I assume quite a lot.
Quite a lot. How many is quite a lot? Lauren, how many do you think?
I'm reckoning, I hope that it's only like 2, but I'm reckoning it could be more. I think Freya's may be more closer.
Freya's right. 3. So you have 1 family on the ground floor, 1 family on the floor above, the first floor, and 1 in the cellar. What do you think happens in the winter in the northwest of England? A lot.
Cold.
It's cold. Something else we're really famous for up here.
It rains.
Yeah, rain. Rains all the time. It's raining now. So in the winter, when it rained, the River Oach floods. It does every year. And what happens to the flood water? Comes into your house. Yeah. And if you're living in the cellar, what do you think happens to you? Yeah. Well, you have to move out if you're lucky. But actually, lots of people in the early 19th century actually drowned in their cellar houses when the rivers broke because it all rushed in and they couldn't get out in time. So it was really common. Pretty awful. So moving on, we're going to talk about food. Now, I'm here in the shop and I've got some props. Sack here of oatmeal. Now, there were 4 items of food that the Rochdale pioneers sold, and obviously they're on the screen: oatmeal, flour, butter and sugar. Now, obviously there are some things missing. There's no meat, and it wasn't because they were all vegetarians, it was because meat was really, really expensive, really hard to get hold of. And there's also no fruit and no vegetables. So do you think that the diet would have been particularly healthy, just eating carbohydrates and sugar?
Not particularly.
Not really, no, not very much. So the reason for that, of course, is that even this really basic food, so just eating porridge and bread, drinking tea, maybe beer, because the water is not really safe to drink, there's no fresh water, just eating and drinking those things, you're not very healthy, you're not going to be very healthy. You don't get much sunlight at all. You work all day, don't see the sun, and on the days when you don't work, there's so much pollution that actually you don't see the sun then either. So people have got really bad health problems, don't have a good diet, they don't live very long. But even this basic food is really expensive. And there's a few reasons for that. Rochdale is so massive, so quickly, and at the point that the population explodes, there's no railway to bring food in. So food has to come either on a cart or on a boat. It takes a long time, it's very expensive. You can't buy lots and lots of it at once. So what happens, unfortunately, at the same time is people are being really badly treated. They're being cheated by the shopkeepers where they buy their food. And it's because it's very easy at this point to buy a sack of food, to tip it out into a container and to mix things into it that really you shouldn't be eating. So some of the things that you might find are in your oatmeal. You might find sand, dust, wood chips, wood shavings. That was quite common. It was really common to mix things into milk as well. One of the most common ones was waste paint, because it's the same colour as milk. Urine sometimes made its way into milk as well. Dirty water. So there's all kinds of things that you can put into food. People wouldn't know were bad for them. They wouldn't realise what was in the food. But gradually, the more and more it happened, people started to understand that this was happening and they were being cheated. And it was even worse because the food was so expensive that people felt they needed to do something about it. So this is really what starts off the campaign for a cooperative shop. The Rochdale pioneers start their society because of all these things. Food's very expensive. People haven't got enough money and they haven't got any power. They've got no say. They can't vote. If they have a campaign or a strike, sometimes the militia is called in, the army. So whenever there's a protest, people come in and they put the protest down, sometimes kill the protesters. That happened lots of times in Rochdale in the 1820s, 30s and 40s. So things are really bad and you can't do anything about it, or at least you can't get people to listen to you. So what do you have to do? Work together and take the decision into your own hands. The only way is up. So this is a picture of modern Manchester. Does anybody know why there's a picture of a wheelbarrow on that slide? No? Okay, well, there's a wheelbarrow here in the building. And there was a story that some people actually, they made it up and said that the pioneers had to buy food to sell in their new shop. And to do that, they had to take a wheelbarrow and walk to Manchester to buy the food, put it in the wheelbarrow, wheel it back to Rochdale. Does anybody know how far Manchester is from Rochdale? Any ideas? How many miles?
60 miles, 100 miles?
No, a lot less than that, but it's still a long way.
About 20, something like that?
It's 13 miles.
That's a long way with a wheelbarrow.
Yeah, you can do it in a day, but it's a long walk. So it's 13 miles one way. So it's too far. So the reason why they had to go to Manchester is because when they wanted to start a cooperative society, they had meetings about it. And lots of people heard about this rumour that some poor people were going to start their own shop. So what they said was, well, you can start it, but we're not going to sell you the food. You can't buy it from us, so you're going to have to go somewhere else. And they were hoping that would put the pioneers off and that they wouldn't do it. But instead, they went to Manchester to buy the food. And they didn't wheel it back in a wheelbarrow. It is just a story, it's just a myth, because it would have been too heavy. And the other reason is because it was December in 1844. It was just before Christmas, 21st of December when the shop opened. And it had been the wettest year on record. So not only was it wet and cold, it was really dark, and they had no way to light their way back from Manchester. They couldn't have walked over the hills because it would be really dangerous. It's dangerous now if you do that in our modern times, so it would have been doubly dangerous with a wheelbarrow full of food. What we think they did was, we think they snuck onto a boat and they got somebody to bring the food back by canal boats. That's what we think happened. But it's a really nice story, and where it comes from is when this shop opened on the Saturday before Christmas, one of the rival shopkeepers came into the shop and said, "This is rubbish, you're not going to last. I could buy all your food that you've got now, and I could put it in my wheelbarrow and wheel it away, and then that's you out of business." That's what he said he would do. So that's where the story of the wheelbarrow comes from. So it's just from what somebody else said. It wasn't really true. It's a nice story though. So this is what the shop looks like, or looked like, before it became a museum. The picture on the right-hand side of your screen. And the picture on the left-hand side is what people thought it looked like in the 1850s, after it had opened as a shop. What do you think? Do you think they look the same, the pictures? They don't really, do they? This one on the left is a bit of an artist's impression. It's not completely true. I mean, it's a little bit too tall for one thing, and the roof is like a witch's hat, really pointed. So it's just an idea of what the shop looked like. And the person who drew it probably never came here. So it was probably just listening to a description of it and drew it for other people to see. And it was because at that point, after the shop had opened, lots of other people in different towns had started to hear about this story and wanted to know more about it. And because they couldn't travel to Rochdale to see it, they couldn't come on a virtual tour like you are, that was their way of understanding what it looked like. And of course, this is the real deal. This was before the museum opened, and it was a bit run down by this point. The museum opened in 1931 and the staircase was falling apart, and like I say, there were no toilets. It was a bit battered, it was a bit of a mess. But from that small shop, small society, others started to open. And they opened using what we call the Rochdale principles, and they're here on the blackboard behind me, under the sack of flour. And what they basically were about was a blueprint to show other people how to do the same thing in their towns or villages, as had happened in Rochdale. So this image on the left is of another co-op shop in a different part of Manchester called Beswick, and it's still quite a deprived part of Manchester now, but at the time, a place like that would have been a lifeline for local people. It would have been a place to get good quality food cheaply, and more importantly, that you knew that the food that was being sold in the shop was safe to eat and that it had been made in a fair way. It hadn't exploited people. So that was really important. And the other picture that's on the right-hand side of the screen is a farm. And this is called Jumbo Farm. It's in Rochdale. It's in a part of Rochdale called Middleton. And this is where a new big type of cooperative society opened. And it was called CWS. And this is one of the CWS brands for oatmeal. So again, going from this to this. And CWS is a group, a federation of other co-ops that come together to make a big co-op called the Co-op Wholesale Society, CWS. Now we call it the Cooperative Group. So when you think about co-op shops in people's high streets, that's it, that's the one. So their roots are here with us as well as lots of other co-ops. They're not the only one, but they are the biggest in the UK. So these are the Rochdale principles. They're a little bit different to the principles that co-ops use now, but basically what these boil down to is that anybody can join the co-op. So there's no discrimination. It doesn't matter if you're a woman or if you're from a different religious background or you have different political beliefs, you're allowed to join. And you're allowed to join equally. Nobody is more important than another person. Everybody gets a vote. Everybody gets a say in how things are done. Everybody gets to put some money in and get some money back. That's called a dividend. Now, we don't always have dividends in co-ops. Sometimes it's things like, if you join, you might get a lovely jumper, like this Woodcraft Folk t-shirt. Or you might get a badge, or you might get another type of benefit for your membership. It's also really important that with these early co-ops, people only dealt in cash. So you couldn't owe any money. You couldn't buy food and say, I'll pay you next week, because what happens if you do that and you don't pay up? The co-op could go out of business. And then the last one, which is really, really important, and it's still as important today as it was in 1844, is that if you're part of a co-op, you are able to get educated, you're able to develop yourself and learn new things and have new opportunities. And that's what all co-ops have in common. That's what makes them different. And it's all based on these original principles. This is a picture from our archive that shows you this part of Manchester. So it shows you Radcliffe and Middleton, Bury and Rochdale. And what's at the bottom of the picture is the ship canal. And this was how, really, food came into the UK and was distributed to poor places where there were lots of poor people living. Things like what we'd call luxury products like chocolate and coffee, tea, and things like that could come into Manchester and be taken by train or by boat or by bus or by lorry all over the country. And it was all under the label of CWS. And what that really means is that you were buying something, you knew where it was coming from, who made it, and you could understand a little bit about the choices you were making when you were buying things. And that eventually leads to supermarkets opening as well as little shops. And people who were the customers, actually it became so popular, the cooperative movement, that 60% of all the food and all the products bought in the UK in the 50s and 60s, in this picture, were bought in co-op shops. And that's quite unusual to us now because most co-op shops are quite small Our co-op organisations are quite small. We don't think of them as massive and really powerful, but they really were. In the mid-20th century, they were huge. And places like Tesco's and Asda were very, very small indeed. So things have changed quite a bit. So now we're on to leisure and culture. Being part of a co-op isn't just about things you buy. It's not just about saving money. It's about having fun as well and about being involved in your community. So these pictures here are ones of a political protest, this one on the left-hand side, and it's a group of mostly women and children campaigning for peace. So again, in the late 1930s, just before the war, there was a real worry amongst people who were involved in co-op societies that there was going to be a war. They didn't want it to happen, and they wanted to use their voice to campaign to ask for there not to be a war, for there to be a peaceful solution instead. And on the right-hand side, that's actually a factory picnic at Crumsell Biscuit Factory. So the factory makes biscuits, things like digestive biscuits, they were really popular there. And these are the workers having a day out in the spring. They're having a spring gala and there's a band playing. And we know that there was a sports day as well. There was running races and things like that. And this tea towel, because it is a tea towel, it's from our collection to do with the Woodcraft folk, as is the snazzy circa 1990 jumper here behind me. So we have got lots of Woodcraft folk things. They're not all physical objects. Some of them are publications, photos, and like I say, we have got some films, so I will make sure that Lauren gets that film of the international camp. So I don't know why I wouldn't play, but technology. So we've got all sorts of things in our collection that reflect you guys, the history of your movement. But you might quite like these photos. I don't know if you've seen these before, or whether they're familiar. No? These are from the 1920s, and these were produced for a brochure to help get people to join the new Woodcraft folk from 1925. And what I really like about this one is the one on the left is a group of young girls and they're out hiking. They've got special hiking bags to go out hiking for the day. And what they were trying to encourage young people to do was to get on the train, go out to the countryside and go exploring. So they'd get them to bring a compass and a map and some water and just go rambling and go and see how far they could go. Obviously, there's no way of communicating with your parents. There's no mobile phones. To be honest, public phone boxes are quite new at this point. You know, they were quite, unusual. You'd only get them in big cities. So I think it's quite scary to get on a train, go out to the middle of Derbyshire or somewhere and roam around and hope for the best. But there was a lot less traffic in those days, so maybe it wasn't too bad. But if you look at the footwear, they don't look like hiking boots. These are like shoes they'd wear to a party. You know, they're not exactly that well equipped, but they're very fashionable for the 1920s, these girls. And the little boy on the right-hand side, he's a drummer, and obviously there were games and activities that were about working together, and one of them was drumming exercises. Don't know if you guys have done anything like that. I'm assuming you have, where you have to keep time with each other and create a beat and not let the beat stop. That started in the 1920s, the very first Woodcraft folk members. But they all look pretty happy. But what was really, really important to the Woodcraft folk was that young people who joined would be able to develop themselves as citizens and understand more about the world, and particularly the outdoors, because most of the early members were from places like Sheffield, Birmingham, Manchester, industrial places. You know, I said before that Rochdale was so polluted that even on a sunny day, you couldn't see the sun, you couldn't feel the sun. That was still the case in the 1920s and 30s. Pollution would be so bad, people would have to put something over their face because they breathe in the smoke and the smog. So if you lived in Manchester like I do, you couldn't just go outside and get a bit of fresh air. It was bad for you unless you went out to the countryside. So all of these organised groups and trips were all about getting young people to connect with nature and with the outside world. And it was particularly interesting because a lot of the people in the government were a bit worried about that. They didn't really want people from working class backgrounds to go out into the countryside and roam around, because they thought what might be happening is they might be trying to have a revolution. They might be trying to have political meetings on the hills and in the valleys, and hiking was just an excuse. Sometimes it was, but there was a big movement in the UK that was started by these people, which was the right to roam in the 1930s. And people said, no, we pay into this country, we pay our taxes, we work really hard, we want to enjoy the countryside, we want to be able to go camping, walking and fishing and doing all sorts of things, cycling. And these are the people that made that happen for us. So we owe them quite a lot. This is what that looks like now, of course. This is the hills just behind the museum in Rochdale at Healy Dell. And these are a group of young people who are part of our young advisors group. We were going on a ramble to show them what the communities in Rochdale used to look like. They were all up in the hills, you know, sheep farmers, and how different it is compared to the busy city of Manchester and the busy town of Rochdale that they live in. So they were all absolutely exhausted after that hike. It was all day, so you know, give them that. But they're doing the same thing as these people in the 1920s are doing, exactly the same experience, and it's just as important. So, what do you know? I'm going to ask a couple of questions. I'm going to see how much you know about cooperatives, whether you've heard of some famous cooperatives. Don't worry if you don't get the questions right. We just want to have a try. Some of them are quite hard. So, any famous co-ops in the UK? Can anyone name a famous co-op?
John Lewis.
John Lewis. Okay, nice. Any more?
It's a bit cliched, but the co-op.
The Co-op Group, yeah. One more guess.
The Scottish Co-operative Group.
Ah, yes, Scott Mid, it's called. That's right. Well, let's see, what did I pick? I thought you might get some of these. John Lewis, a Waitrose partnership. Suma, they're a wholesale food provider. They sell things like vegan food, like food that's cruelty-free, that kind of thing. You know, Whole Foods. Nicer Stores, they're like a convenience chain. And of course, the Co-op Group. They're just some of the cooperatives. There's absolutely thousands of them. And they do all sorts of different things. But they're some of the ones that are most familiar. These are some co-ops from other places around the world. I bet you didn't know that Ocean Spray drink was made by a co-op. So it's not co-ops tell you that they're co-ops, actually. Some of them are quite good at hiding it. So some of these brands are made by co-ops, some really quite famous ones. Now, quiz. So the first question, we'll see how many of these you get right. And what I want you to do is to put your hand up for A, B or C when I've asked you the question. So the first question is, what percentage of the world's population is a member of a co-op? So is it A, 20%? How many for A? 1, 2, okay. Is it B, 12%? 2, 3, okay. Or is it C, 6%? It's quite even, that. So which is right?
The middle one here. Always up well.
B, 12%. It's a lot less than it used to be. But having said that, the membership of co-ops is going up again, and particularly in countries where more people are badly off. So in places like South America, West Africa, India, Sri Lanka, the memberships are going up there. They're not so much in Europe. Where's the most successful co-op in the world? Is it A, France? So anybody for France? No? Is it B, Germany? 1 for Germany. And C, Japan? Oh, loads of people think Japan. Nearly everybody. You are incorrect. It is France. I know. Actually, the most successful co-op is a bank. It's a cooperative bank. It's called Crédit Agricole. It's a farmer's bank because 75% of all farmers in France are cooperators. So that's why it's so successful. It's got so much money. France is a big country, after all, very rural country. And the last question, which country has the most cooperative economy? That means where there's lots of businesses and lots of shops and lots of organisations that are co-ops. So which country has the most? Is it USA? Is it B, South Africa, or is it C, New Zealand? So votes for A, please, for USA. We've got one for USA. Any for B? South Africa, few for South Africa. What about C, New Zealand? You're quite good, you lot, aren't you? New Zealand, well done. Yes, it has. And in fact, would you believe it, that co-ops in New Zealand earn $42 billion a year? It's absolutely massive. So it's almost 20% of all of the economy of New Zealand is cooperative. Quite fancy that. It's quite good. So it's more than a shop. Sometimes it's a way of having houses. Sometimes it's a way of looking after ill people. Sometimes it's schools. Sometimes it's clubs and leisure facilities. One of the popular co-ops in this part of the world is a swimming co-op to teach people how to swim. So there's all sorts of different ones. But what they all have in common is these 7 things. So these are the things that your involvement in co-ops will be the same as somebody who's in a co-op in Japan or somebody who's in a co-op in Uruguay. You know, that's quite a nice thing to know, that you have something in common with people all around the world. So I'm going to, at this point, ask you if you've got any questions for me. And I have also got a few items that I want to show you if we've got time. So time to fire away. What do you want to know? Anybody? You'll have to unmute your mics. Gracie, go ahead.
Does the Woodcraft Folk and the co-op group, or just general co-ops, actually like interact much, or is it just they're quite similar?
They do interact, actually. It might interest you to know that until the COVID pandemic hit, most of our visitors come from other parts of the UK and other countries, but they are part of co-ops. So they visit us, but they don't just visit us, they go and see the people at the group, because that's in Manchester too. It's quite easy for them to do that because they could just sort of go across the road, you know. But yes, we do talk to each other. Lots of co-op organisations have relationships. Sorry, Lauren, was that?
Yeah, no, that was absolutely the right answer. And also, as Kate's just put in the chat, that that dividend that you mentioned before, actually Woodcraft Folk groups now can apply to get a bit of that dividend as sort of co-op members. So we are very much in contact, I would say, with lots of different co-ops in the UK, including the Co-ops group. We met Ed last week from the Co-ops group, and he told us lots. And now we've also met you. So yeah, lots of different communications on.
We used to camp regularly at the Co-op College in Loughborough. Those of us who are older will remember different days of the Co-op, and big camps, big Woodcraft Folk camps were in Loughborough.
At Stamford Hall?
Yep.
That's right. Yeah, we've got some lovely pictures of Stamford Hall in our archive, including the open-air swimming pool, which never looked that inviting, to be honest. All the pictures make it look very cold.
Yeah, I don't think we got to use it. I can't remember using it. I can remember camping in Loughborough.
Oh. Any other questions? Would anybody like to know anything? No? I've got some objects here from our museum collection that I wanted to, if we had time, to show you. And it's not the full amount, because our stores where we keep all of our objects are in a different part of Rochdale. And because of coronavirus, we can't get into that store. So some of the things I would normally be able to show you, I can't get. And it's the same in Manchester, that we get a little bit of access to our archive at the moment, but not very much. So some of the things I have got in the building, I wanted to show you. Now, the first thing I'm going to do is I'll put a pair of gloves on, because what I've got to show you is really old.
Liz?
We are a museum.
Liz, can you stop sharing your screen so we can see you big again?
Of course, yes. Forgot about that.
You can just focus on one screen.
Some of us are old, Gracie. We need it done for us.
That's okay. It's my me forgetting. So this object is as old as the co-op itself. Anybody know what that is? You should know what that is.
Oh.
It's a saw. I'm going to show you as well why it's a little bit unusual. Can you see the handle? Can you see what's happening with the handle here? So there's a nail holding the handle onto the saw at both ends. So it's been repaired. So what does that tell you about that object? Who might have owned that?
Definitely been used a lot, and the person who owned it couldn't buy another one.
Absolutely. So any guesses as to why we've got this old tool here in this building?
Probably because it belonged to the Rochdale pioneers.
Very good. It did. So this saw was actually used to build the shop. So it was really basic at the time. This little room that I'm in was all the pioneers had. They didn't have the whole building at the start. They were only allowed one room. It was expensive. It was £10 rent, and their stake to open the shop was £28. They had £1 each, and almost half of that went on just opening the shop, just getting the rent paid. And one of the things that they had to do, that they were told to do by the landlord, was turn this old warehouse into a shop. You have to build a counter, a door, windows, you have to build all the storage yourself. And they did that because one of the members, called James Mannock, he was a carpenter. That was his job. This was his saw. And there was another tool that he had, which is here. And it was a drill. Now the bit for the drill is missing. So we've just got the handle. And how it works is you turn it like that to make a hole in wood. It's quite clever. And obviously it's been used a lot, and there's the metal bit, the expensive bit's been missing. And he said, you can borrow my tools to build the shop, but I need them back because I need them for my job. But we've still got them because they didn't give them back. So they were very clever and they were very nice and they were very community minded, but they didn't give the stuff back. So that's why we've still got it. Sorry, Gracie, go ahead.
I used a lot of tools like that because I'm home educated now, but when I went to school, I went to a place called Winstone, which is a Steiner school, and we did a lot of woodwork, and we used tools just like that with the turning. We didn't use any electric.
Yep, that's right. Well, they didn't have them at the time, of course, but if you can learn how to use tools like this, well, you're sorted, because then if there is a power cut or we don't have electric anymore, you don't have to worry about it. So Victorian skills do come in useful sometimes. So those are some of the things that we've got from the very, very first days. And we've also got the records that were made about what was bought, who did it, whose job was whose. And some of the records are quite interesting to read because sometimes the pioneers had quite bad arguments, fell out with each other, some of them shouted at each other. Occasionally sometimes there was fighting that happened because they had very strong opinions, and sometimes they had their meetings in the pub, so that didn't help. So they were definitely not like a business group of people. They were definitely ordinary people, and they definitely had their fallings out, including stealing each other's things. So we'll move on to a couple of other objects just while I'm here. Okay, so now that might be familiar. Any ideas what that's for?
Baking bread.
Yep, you're clever guys. So I know it's reversed, but it says Co-op on the top, and that's because when you've baked your bread and it comes out and it has Co-op on the top of it, it'll remind you while you're cutting it up to have your dinner to shop at the Co-op the next time you need some flour to make a loaf of bread. And that's a really early bread tin, so that's from, again, really early days of making, selling flour for people to make their own bread at home. And then this, I quite like this as well, because when fresh milk and fresh cream and things like that started to be sold, it needed to be measured out in front of the customers. So this is a half pint pouring measure for milk. It has half a pint on it. And what's really good is you can see how much you're going to get. So if I come with a jug to buy some milk, I can see exactly what the shopkeeper's pouring out. I get exactly what I've asked for. But in ordinary shops, ones that weren't like this Co-op society, if you went into the shop and said, I want half a pound of butter and I want a pint of milk, the shopkeeper could go away into the back of the shop where you couldn't see what was happening and could mix things up, and you wouldn't know that you were getting exactly the right amount. So things like that are really important for co-ops, making sure the customers know what they're getting. Of course, another thing is the scales. Back in the Victorian times, scales just weren't used in shops. And once co-op societies started to be built and started to open, they all had scales, so customers could see they were being treated right. And that eventually meant that all shops had to have scales. So it starts here. That wasn't a thing before. I'm going to show you a couple of other items that are a little bit different. These are from a little bit later on in the period. This is a jigsaw puzzle made by CWS, so that's the co-op group. It's not very exciting, is it? It's brown. There's no picture. It's just a puzzle. There's no actual picture, but it was really cheap. So it was like a cheap toy that you could buy for your children. Everybody could afford something like that because it's all made out of cardboard. So that's quite nice. And something else that you might have, if you bought your tea from the English and Scottish CWS or the SCWS, you might get packs of playing cards with your tea. And these have pictures of where the tea comes from. So places like India and Sri Lanka. And what they show you is they show you the workers and they show the children of the workers at school. Because when you buy tea from the CWS, they put some of the money into teaching people in other countries, which is quite nice. So we know that, you know, I would personally have preferred to buy tea that helped other people. So, and it's still happening because, of course, fair trade products, making sure people get paid a decent amount of money for what they do, that's really important to us still. And then I thought you might also like this. Anybody know what this is?
Is it a kilogram?
It's not a weight. It might become more obvious if I show you. There's a hole in it.
It's a money box.
A lock. Any ideas?
Is it
A
an
money box?
iron?
Is it a what?
An iron.
It's not an iron. It looks a bit like one. It's really heavy as well.
A money box?
It's a money box, yeah. So
For
this
saving.
is from a Melton Society, and what you do is you put your money in there and you can't get it out until you take it to the Co-op Society. They've got the key. So you don't have the key. So that way you can't be tempted to go into the money box and take the money out and spend it before it's full. So it's a way of helping particularly children to save some money. So it's really heavy though, and it's a bit rusty now. But that's from the sort of late Victorian period, the 1880s, 1890s. I quite like that one. We've got time for maybe one more object. And I'm going to get a slightly more modern object out now. Anybody know what this is?
Is it a radio?
It is a radio. Aren't you clever? Because there's some children who see that and they have no idea what it is. It's got a little speaker in it that gives it away, I think. It's a radio, and it's called a Defiant radio. And these were made by cooperatives to be sold to cooperators. Sometimes they were presents. If you were involved in like a running race or something, you might get a gift like that. Who do you think it's for? Because it's quite small. Who do you think it's for? But where do you have it in your house? Any ideas? It's got little feet at the bottom.
Your kitchen?
Could be in the kitchen.
Your bedroom?
Yeah. It's designed to go in a young person's bedroom because it's small, it can fit on the windowsill. If you don't have a proper table or you have to share a room, it's very little. And it sits in the bedroom, and that way you can listen to your music without having to listen to what your parents are interested in. You can have your own thing. So again, this is from the 1940s, and this is really when young people's music started to become really popular, and the idea of teenagers started to arrive from America. People wanted to listen to things that their parents really hated. So that's designed for a young person. And sometimes they come with a handle and they're a little bit bigger and they have a bigger speaker. And they were designed to go out to parks and places for picnics and things like that, or on camps, and they could be wound up. So you didn't have to, you didn't have to plug them in. You could just wind it up and it would still work. So things like that, they were called Defiant radios because the idea was that young people would be political and be activists, and that they would listen to things together and take action as a new young generation. So, okay, all those people have died now, but the same idea is still around, isn't it? So there's some of the things, just a few from our collection, and I wanted to give you a chance to have a look, because of course you can't come in through the door like you would normally be able to do. But I hope that's given you a bit of a snapshot as to the kinds of things we look after. So yeah, so there you go, short and sweet. We got it all in within the hour. If there's any other comments or questions, fire away.
Thanks so much, Liz. That was absolutely fantastic. I feel like I've learned a lot more than I have in a long time. So I feel like I've been to the museum and seen lots of things. Does anybody have any last minute questions for Liz that she hasn't answered? And maybe, hopefully, when things get into our new normal, everybody can convince their group leaders that they should go on a little trip to Rochdale and to see the museum in the real flesh. I don't think there's any more questions. Thanks so much, Liz.
Yes.
Thank you.
We're all
Have a
going-
great rest of Co-op's Fortnight, everyone.
Thanks so much, you too. Hopefully everybody can join us tomorrow for our Thinking Forward for our bright future of the cooperative world. And on Saturday is the International Day of the Co-ops, where there's lots of stuff going on around climate change. So thanks so much, Liz. Everybody have a lovely evening and see you all soon.
See you soon.
See you soon. Thank you so much, Liz.
Thank you.